Okay, so for the congruent triangles review, of course we're all fairly aware that what we're doing is trying to create corresponding parts with our triangles. So if I'm looking at this statement right here, triangle YWX is congruent to YPR, then I can look at this triangle and I can go ahead and fill out all the information that I need to, right? If I'm looking at angle X, well, angle X is going to correspond to angle R. So I could put angle R right here. And because it's telling me that they're congruent, the triangles are congruent, then the corresponding angles are congruent. So therefore, angle X is congruent to angle R. All right? And everything else fills out here, right? YW is congruent to YP. WX is congruent to PR. So WX is congruent to PR. And the last one we can see here that XY is congruent to RY. XY is congruent to RY. And of course the angles create themselves to be congruent. These are vertical angles, so they're congruent to each other. Y is congruent to itself, Y. And then W is congruent to P. Taking congruences another step further, we're looking at trying to be able to prove that the triangles are congruent. So we're going to kind of skip through this right here. Let's say I wanted to go ahead and write a statement that indicates, well, let's go back to this. Let's go back to this for a second and at least do one of them. So we're marking the sides and angles for each pair of triangles to indicate that they are congruent. So again, this is what we were doing before. BC is congruent to CB. CD is congruent to BZ. And then we can see here that DB is congruent to ZC. Right? Angle D is congruent to angle Z. Angle D is congruent to angle Z. DCB is congruent to ZBC. ZBC. So this angle right here is going to be congruent to this angle right here. And then we can just fill in the last part. But you really have to rely on this statement right here to be able to fill this out properly. So if I wanted to write a statement that indicates that these triangles are congruent, then I can go, how I initiate the first one doesn't matter as long as the second one corresponds to it. So I can say triangle LNM. All right, so I went from the 3 to the 1 to the 2. I'll do the same thing. Is congruent to LHJ. All right. Making sure that we're matching these together. Triangle HGF, I just went 1, 2, 3 on this one. Has to be congruent to SGU. So proving this is congruent, we're going to be looking at 5 different ways of being able to prove congruency. Before, when we were looking at triangles to be congruent, we had to see that all 6 pairs, the 3 sides and the 3 angles, were congruent to each other. This time, we're going to be able to prove now, though, that triangles are congruent without having to know all of the angles and the sides for them. Usually about 3 out of 6 is going to be enough for them. There's 5 ways to prove that the triangles are congruent to each other. The first one is side, side, side. That means that the two triangles are congruent if all 3 sides are equal to each other. We saw that before. If I have 2 triangles where all of the sides are congruent to each other, well, then our triangles are congruent because the sides, all 3 sides, correspond to each other. Then we have side, angle, side. This gets a little bit tricky because what I'm saying is that I know a pair of sides and the angle that is included between these 2 sides. So I can see here that this angle, that side is congruent to this side. This side is congruent to this side. And the included angle, the angle that exists between those 2 sides, is congruent. Therefore, I have a side, angle, side congruency. That's what side, angle, side means. And again, you can pause this at any point to go ahead and write the notes down for yourself as we go through this. Now you have angle, side, angle, which is exactly opposite of side, angle, side. This is where we know that 2 of the angles are congruent to each other and the included side is equal to each other, right? So if we look at these 2 triangles here, I can see that this angle is congruent to this angle, and I can see that this angle is congruent to this angle. Because the included side between these 2 triangles is congruent, I know that they are congruent by angle, side, angle. And sometimes if we just write the A's and the S's out, it'll go ahead and show you kind of obviously what it is. The next one is angle, angle, side. In this case right here, we're talking about 2 angles, consecutive angles, one after the other, and then the side at the end is congruent to each other. So when we look at this example right here, I can see that this angle right here is congruent to this angle right here. The very next angle is congruent as well, and then the side right after that is congruent to the other side after those angles on the other triangle. So therefore we have triangles that are congruent by angle, angle, side. The very last one has to do just with right triangles. Okay? Where all I need to know is the hypotenuse of the triangles are congruent to each other, and then one of the legs. So I need to know that the hypotenuse, which is located across from the right angle on a right triangle, this is congruent to this, and then I either need to know that this leg of the triangle is congruent to this leg of the triangle, or I need to know that this leg is congruent to this leg. Now we're going to break these things up. Okay, we're just going to go ahead and work on side, 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 and side, angle, side today. But you need to have the notes for all of these. So here I have a right triangle. So I have the opportunity for this to be congruent by hypotenuse leg. Well, I can see here that this hypotenuse is congruent to this hypotenuse, and this leg right here is congruent to this leg right here. So this is the only one that I just need to have 2 pieces of information for. And so they're congruent by hypotenuse leg. We've seen before that we cannot use angle, angle, angle. Just because all of my angles are congruent to each other does not mean that the triangles are congruent. I can have this triangle to be 2, 4, and 5, and this one over here could be 4, 8, and 10. They could still maintain the same angles, but be very, very different sides. So therefore, they would not be congruent to each other. All right. And the last one, we do not say bad words in class. It cannot be angle, side, side. All right? That is a no-no. So, we are talking about primarily side, angle, side, 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 angle, side, angle, 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 side, and hypotenuse leg. So let's look at these for a second. We're just going to kind of run through a few examples real quickly. So if I look at these right here, these two triangles, this triangle and this triangle, I can see pretty clearly that this angle right here is congruent to this angle right here. I know that this side right here is congruent to this side right here. The other piece of information that I know is that this side right here is congruent to itself. Well, are these congruent to each other? No, because I have angle, side, side, angle, side, side. So they are not congruent to each other. Number two, I can see that this angle right here is congruent to this angle. This angle right here is congruent to this angle. And that included side between the two triangles is congruent to each other as well. So therefore, these two triangles are congruent by angle, side, angle. Let's look at the next one. Of course, this side is congruent to this side. This side is congruent to this side. And of course, the shared side is equal to each other. So they're congruent by side, side, side. Looking at the next one, this angle is congruent to this angle. This side is congruent to this side. And the other piece of information that I know is that this angle is congruent to this angle. So they are congruent by angle, side, angle. Number 5. Well, let's look at what we got here. Angle, angle, side, side. What else do I have? I really can't see anything else. There's nothing else that's obvious that I have any shared angles or sides that are in common or congruent, so therefore it's not congruent to each other. Now we can look at this and we can say to ourselves, all right, this might be hypotenuse leg, because I have a right triangle here. But I don't know anything about my hypotenuses. It does not tell me that they're congruent to each other, so I cannot use hypotenuse leg. So what else can I use? Well, I know that this angle right here is congruent to this angle. This side is congruent to this side, and this angle is congruent to this angle. So therefore, these two triangles are congruent by angle, side, angle. All right. So we're going to go through a few more of these when I get back. What I want to make sure of, though, is that you're familiar with these, and I'm just going to give you a worksheet to work on that has just side, angle, side, and side, side, side. Those are the two easiest ones to work with. All right. The sub will have the answers, the key to the worksheets. So if you have any questions, just go up and take a look at them. All right. See you on Monday. Behave, please.